Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Welcome to my summer book recs. I've decided to split these up into 3 categories, so we're just gonna jump right into our first category, which is books that take place at a summery location. We're gonna start off with the queen of summer reads, Miss Elin Hilderbrand. Every single one of her books takes place on Nantucket. So I have 3 of her books I'm gonna recommend to you guys, but honestly I could recommend so many of her books. These are just ones that are more fresh on my mind that I've read recently, slash just some of my favorite Elin Hilderbrand books. So starting with the 5-star weekend, I think this was actually my first summer read of the season. So I read this one very recently, and basically our main character is really going through a hard time in her life. You obviously dive into all of those details, but because she's going through such a hard time, she decides that she's going to create this 5-star weekend, which is basically a perfect weekend on Nantucket for her and her friends, basically as a way to help her cheer herself up and kind of get out of this funk that she's in because of all these hard things that are going on in her life. So she plans this weekend and she has a bunch of friends come meet her on Nantucket, and obviously there's some drama, there's some things go down. This weekend does not end up being like her perfect weekend. I feel like a lot of Elin Hilderbrand's books either have this underlying plot of romance or they have this underlying plot of mystery, and the next book I'm going to talk about actually has this underlying mystery plot, which I read this one last year right before the TV show came out, so I'm not going to talk about this one a ton because I feel like a lot of people have seen the TV show. But if you haven't seen the TV show, I highly recommend The Perfect Couple by Elin Hilderbrand. And this one, our main character, I believe she's the maid of honor, and she is at her best friend's wedding. In the morning of the wedding, the bride, her best friend, is found dead. So for majority of the book, this best friend is kind of recapping her life and the relationship she's had and her relationship with the best friend, while also trying to solve what happened to the best friend. And honestly, if you have seen this TV show, I recommend still reading the book because they did change a good amount from the book versus the TV show, so I still recommend reading this one. I obviously very much enjoyed it. And then the next and final Elin Hilderbrand book I have to talk about is 28 Summers. This one has more of a romancy plot to it. You're mostly following our 2 main characters, our MMC and our FMC, and basically they have decided to meet, I think it's every Memorial Day weekend or every Labor Day weekend, they meet on Nantucket at our female main character's house, and they have just decided to spend that weekend together no matter what. And in this book, no matter what truly means no matter what. I did not think I would like this book as much as I did because there was a lot of cheating going on in this book, and that really bothered me. But I just fell in love with this book so much to the point where I wasn't bothered enough about the cheating to make it affect my rating. I rated this a 5-star. Actually obsessed with it. If you take away only one Elin Hilderbrand book to read from this video, should be this one, if you ask me. And obviously since they're only meeting one weekend for 28 years, you also learn just more about them as people, and I am such a character-driven person when it comes to books. Like, I have to love the characters for me to love the books. Needless to say, I loved the characters in this book. And kind of going a different route, if you're looking more for the YA range, I have Love and Gelato. This book takes place in Italy, which I feel like just anywhere in Europe is peak summer vibes to me as someone that lives not in Europe. But basically our main character's mom dies, and so she sends her daughter to Italy to meet her dad for the first time. And honestly, the premise kind of makes it sound like it would be a sad book because obviously she's grieving her mom, but it's not something that's talked about a ton in the book, which I feel like is what makes it more of that YA romance, lighter hearted summary read. I feel like, at least with my experience in YA books, they don't really go deep down into grief and those heavier topics. I mean, sometimes they do, but typically they don't when it comes to like a romance YA book. So I feel like this one's perfect if you're looking for that lighthearted YA read. And the Italy vibes in this book are top tier. I kind of want my little sisters to read this book. So I feel like this would be a good plane ride slash travel book because it's pretty short and I found it pretty fast paced. I remember reading this book in like just a couple of days. I tried to pick out a wide array of books to recommend to you all. So the next book I want to talk about is The Villa. This is a mystery thriller, and I feel like a lot of the times when I'm thinking of summer books, I always think of like a summer romance, but this is a good summery mystery thriller because they are in Europe. I believe they're in Italy? Either way, I can't remember off the top of my head, but they're in a villa somewhere in Europe, and this villa has this tragic backstory, so you get this now and then perspective. And it's also 2 authors in this villa, so it's very like book lover coded in that sense that they're both authors and they're writing in this villa. But one of the writers kind of becomes obsessed with what happened at this villa, and she basically tries to get to the bottom of what happened in this villa. It's more of a lower key mystery thriller type book, as in like you're most likely not going to be like scared or anything like that, but I feel like that makes it good for the summer as well, just a European villa vibe. And then I have a series to recommend. This is the Guncle series. So you start with the Guncle and then they have the Guncle Abroad. Both of these books have a summery vibe. I mean, like, just look at the cover. But I was specifically thinking of the Guncle Abroad when I sat down to write a list of books I wanted to recommend to you all for the summertime. But you definitely have to read these books in order. So in the Guncle, I believe believe it's his sister dies or something like that. Someone very close to him dies, and so he decides to take care of their kids for the summer. So obviously they are all dealing with the grief and the loss. This book manages to talk about grief in a lighter-hearted way, which I feel like is good for a summary book. But the main character has such a big personality, and this is basically his first time ever really taking care of kids, so he doesn't have a ton of experience in that sense, but he also used to be an actor, and I feel like that comes out in his character as well, and like how he talks to the kids. He also like makes up a bunch of different like lingo, and the kids are like, what are you talking about? I also just highly recommend listening to these because that's what I did, and the author narrates these books and he does an amazing job. And I think I talked about it a tiny bit, but in the second book they all travel abroad. They go somewhere in Europe. I'm not sure if it ever tells you exactly where, but the vibes are there. And then I have an oldie but a goodie. This is Love in Other Words by Cristina Lauren. It takes place on a lake, and every summer these two families used to meet at their lake houses to spend the whole summer together. So it's second chance romance, and it's also childhood friends to lovers, which those two tropes I love so much. I'm not going to talk about this book a ton because I feel like a lot of people have already read this one, because I feel like it was a popular OG TikTok book. If you haven't read this one and you're thinking about it, now is your sign to do it because it's very, very good. And then on that same note, I also recommend Every Summer After. They are similar books, so if you have read Every Summer After and you liked it and you're looking for a different book similar to that one, I recommend Love in Other Words, and vice versa obviously. But I definitely don't recommend reading these books back to back because like I said, they're very similar, and I did that when I was reading them because I didn't realize how similar they would be. So I don't recommend doing that, but I do recommend both of these books individually. Like I said, they're very similar. So Every Summer After is, I believe, is also second chance, and it takes place at a lake, so it has similar qualities, which is why I don't recommend reading them back to back or super close to each other. And then my next category is just straight summer vibe. These are just books that I've read that feel very summery, but they don't necessarily take place at like a lake or a beach or anywhere in Europe. But the vibe of this one is a wedding at a winery, which 100% gives me just summer vibes. And I'm not necessarily sure that a winery is very summery. I feel like it can also be a little bit fall, but the cover and just the vibe of the wedding in general just gave me summer vibes. This is another second chance romance. You already know I love a second chance romance. Like I said, it takes place at a winery and there's a wedding going on, so our main male character is the best man. The two of them and the groom all grew up being best friends, and basically some things start kind of going wrong with the wedding, and so obviously the maid of honor and the best man go out and try to fix all these things that are happening. So they have to work together after a period of not really speaking to each other for a long time. I feel like whenever I'm trying to recommend a romance book, I always end up talking about the tropes that are in the book, but I highly recommend this one, especially if you like that wedding scene. I feel like the wedding isn't too much of the book. For me, it was the perfect amount of wedding vibes, but also like the summer vibes and romance, and it was just a good mix of all of those things. And then I feel like it would not be a summer book recommendations if I didn't talk about Emily Henry. In my mind, she's similar to Elin Hilderbrand in the sense that Elin Hilderbrand I love to read in the summer, obviously because it takes place on Nantucket and they're just very summery books in general. Emily Henry's books you can read anytime, but they for some reason give me that summery vibe, some more than others. So first one is People We Meet on Vacation, another friends to lovers situation, and they're reconnecting after a long time apart. You basically have two besties who used to take vacation together all the time, and they kind of just went their separate directions, and you'll learn why, but they decide to reconnect and take a vacation again together, and then things just spiral from there. And then last Emily Henry book I'll recommend, even though there's so many that I could recommend, this is Funny Story by Emily Henry. This was her release last year. I still haven't read her new release this year, but I just got my copy on Libby, so I'm very excited to start that one soon. But Funny Story is another not technically summer book, but her writing just gives me summer vibes. I think maybe because I'm used to reading Emily Henry in the summer because her books kind of come out late spring, early summer-ish. But basically you have our two main characters, and both of our main characters' significant others leave them to start dating each other. So they decide to move in together, and it's honestly not really a decision. It's more of like they don't really have anywhere else to go because she was living with her boyfriend and Miles was basically like, okay, like you can come live with me. And so they're kind of trying to navigate this new, I guess, relationship slash roommate situation, because obviously they didn't know each other before this whole thing happened, so it's basically like moving in with a stranger. So it's a lot of their dynamic and how they grow together but also apart, since obviously they both just went through a pretty rough breakup. So highly recommend pretty much any Emily Henry book. I'm also thinking this summer I will reread Happy Place because I loved that book so much, and I believe they're at a lake in that one, so definitely one of the more summery Emily Henry books. And then I have another series to recommend. This is the Finlay Donovan is Killing Killing It series. I think there's like 5 or 6 books out in the series, so this could give you a lot of books to read if you end up liking the first one. So the first one is Finlay Donovan is Killing It, and I always describe these books as rom-com meets mystery because basically our main character is at a Panera Bread and she's with her agent and she's kind of pitching her new book idea, and the woman at the table next to them overhears Finlay talking about her book and thinks that she is like a for hire, so she asks her to her husband, and Finlay's like, no, like that's not what I do, and things just kind of spiral out of control from there. And this is another series that I highly recommend listening to. I listened to this one as well. The narrator does an amazing job, and I just was kicking my feet laughing because, like I said, it's kind of got those rom-com-y vibes but also a mystery vibe to it as well. Just the way that the author manages to combine those two genres made it not only super intriguing but also just funny and a fun read as well. And then last book I have in this category is Blush. This is another book that takes place at a winery, which, like I mentioned before, wineries just give me that summer vibe for some reason. Also, just the cover of this book is really pretty. Anything that like looks like this or is like colorful and fun will give me that summer vibe. But basically our main character is trying to save her family winery because the winery is going through some turmoil, but at the same time she's having some marriage problems and she's also kind of uncovering some family secrets as well. So there's multiple things kind of going on in her life, but I feel like the winery vibe makes this a good summer read. And this is also a book I don't feel like I hear a lot of people talking about, so I like to try to mix in some not as popular books into my recommendations. And then the final category I have to talk about is Sad Girl Summer. I only have 4 books to talk about in this category because I feel like not a ton of people want to read sad books in the summer, but if you do want to, I've got you. I feel like we're gonna like ease into the sadness because I have my list in front of me and I feel like each book just gets sadder and sadder on my list, but there's only 4 here. So we're gonna start with How to Walk Away by Katherine. This book is very sad in the sense of what happens to the main character and how she has to go and literally change her entire life because of what happened to her, which I feel like it helps to go into this book as blind as possible. But basically something happens to the main character in the beginning of the book which causes her to have to completely change her life, completely rebuild her life, and obviously what happens to her is very sad, but I feel like this book didn't end up crushing my soul like some of these other books did that I'll talk about. And not that it had a message of hope by any means, but I feel like our main character was just very resilient, and I feel like my love for her made me just root for her. I don't know if that makes a ton of sense, but I feel like this one is one of the less sad books that I have to talk about, and I just highly recommend this. I think this was actually my first Katherine book and I really liked it, but I will say I did go into this book expecting it to be super sad and to like tear me apart, and so I feel like that might be part of the reason why I didn't end up thinking this book was like super sad. And then I have If He Had Been With Me, which is another YA book. I feel like I didn't have a ton of YA book recommendations in this video, so let me know if you want some more of those. But you're basically following this friend group that is in high school. You're following their relationships and just them navigating high school and college. Well, they don't go through college, but they, you know what I mean. Senior/junior year of high school is like normally when you start thinking about college and like deciding what you want to do. But I will say I was just talking about this book in a wrap up. This was also in a reading vlog, I think in April, and I feel like it made it sound like I didn't like this book, but I did really like this book. I gave it a 4-star, and the only reason it wasn't a 5-star was because I guessed the ending, which I just hate when I can guess the end of a book, even when it's not a thriller, mystery. Wait, what? What am I even saying? I don't even know, but being able to guess the ending has well held this book back from a 5-star. I just ended up being so attached to the characters at the end of this book. If you haven't read this book at this point, because it's very popular, definitely read it. And then we're going to end the Sad Girl Summer section of this video with 2 books by the same author. And I feel like you already know who I'm going to talk about. We're going to talk about some Cristina books, okay? And there's a lot of her books that I've read and enjoyed, but the 2 books that I picked out are the saddest books, in my opinion, that I have read. So we'll start with The Four Winds. I think this one might be even sadder than the one I'm going to talk about next, which will probably shock so many of you, but this book was literally so sad to me that I had to stop reading it physically and switch to the audiobook because I just like couldn't physically read it anymore. I don't know if that even makes sense, but physically reading it versus listening to the audio, it was just too much to physically read it. But this takes place during the Texas Dust Bowl, and I didn't know anything about this time in history before I read this book, which I feel like is part of the reason why it was so sad to me. But you're basically following a family during the Texas Dust Bowl, and there's a lot of poverty and obviously like health issues and just how they dealt with the Dust Bowl and how that affected them as a family and like what they did. I feel like that's all I can say without giving anything away. But if you've read Kristin Hannah or you know anything about Kristin Hannah, she always delivers a hard-hitting, sad book. She's also just so amazing at writing and creating these stories and characters that feel super realistic, which I think is a main reason why I find them so sad. But we're gonna end the Sad Girl Summer section by talking about another sad book from Kristin Hannah, which is one of her more popular books. So take this as your sign. If you haven't read it, you need to. This is The Nightingale by Kristin Hannah. Sorry if the angle changed, my camera died, but I was basically just trying to talk about The Nightingale by Kristin Hannah. This takes place during World War II, which is one of my favorite time periods to read about in a historical fiction. But this one is a little bit unique in the sense that I feel like a lot of these books don't really follow women as closely as this book does. So this book follows two sisters and the different paths that they take during the war and kind of like their different ways of aiding the war effort and just how their lives changed in general during the war. I 100% sobbed during this book, so not for the faint of heart. It's also quite a long book, but I highly recommend it. It is so good. One of my favorite World War II books, and I've read a good amount of World War II historical fiction. And then I thought we'd also talk about my summer TBR a little bit because I have 10 books on my summer TBR. I own a couple of them, but honestly most of them are just books that I have heard good things about or have been recommended to me. I honestly don't know a ton about any of these books. Whenever I get a book recommended either on Instagram or YouTube or my comment section, I will write it down because I'm like, okay, I want to read this book. So that's where I pulled these books from. I don't think I'm going to get to all of these books by any means, but I like to have options, you know? So we'll start with the ones I own physically. First up, I have The Girls in the Stilt House. This book just gives me Where the Crawdads Sing vibes for some reason. And the only reason it gives me like summery vibes is because I think it takes place on a swamp. That's what it is. It's a swamp in the Baton Rouge. No. It's somewhere in the South. I'm not sure, but it follows two girls and basically something like dangerous happens to them. I don't know, but I loved Where the Crawdads Sing and I think it's just the cover that reminds me of that book, so I want to read that. And then the next book I want to read is When the Rivers Rise. This is part of a series, but it basically follows high school sweethearts after, it's one of the hurricanes, Hurricane Florence. Sounds sad, but also hurricane season's in the summer and the cover just gives summery vibes, so maybe this will be part of the Sad Girl Summer book recommendations next summer. We'll see if I like it or not. And then I also want to read the second book in the Love and Gelato series. This is Love and Luck. I have no idea what this book is even about. I just know that I liked Love and Gelato a lot, so I obviously want to read the second book in the series as well. And then we're actually going to shift into a couple Elle and Hilderbrand books I have that I want to read. Honestly, any Elle and Hilderbrand book that I can get my hands on, I'm going to read it this summer because I love Elle and Hilderbrand and I want to read all of her books eventually. So the only book I own by her right now that I haven't read is The Blue Bistro. I have no idea what this is about, but it says a summer of secrets may change her life forever. So we'll see if I like this one. Two more Elle and Hilderbrand books I want to read are The Hotel Nantucket, which I'm surprised I haven't read this one just because I feel like it's one of her more popular books. That probably means it's just harder for me to get my hands on because I like to get a lot of her books either like through the public library or thrifted, which this one was thrifted. That's why it kind of looks like it's been read already. It's also one of these smaller copies, which I used to hate the smaller copies, but recently I'm like, okay, it's kind of easier to read these small copies in bed. I don't know what it is, but I'm kind of liking them now. And then I have The Identicals by Elle and Hilderbrand simply because I love Miss Ellen, okay? I also want to read Pictures of You. No idea what this one's about. And I want to read Along the Infinite Sea. Another book, I can't remember what it's about. And I want to read This Is Your Life, Harriet Chance, and The Last Summer at Chelsea Beach. Like I said, this is just a loose TBR. I don't think I'm going to get to all these books. They're just on my radar. I honestly think a lot of my summer books will probably come from the public library and from Libby. So it really just depends on what's available on Libby and what I find at the public library. So I hope you all enjoyed this video. Stay tuned for a little summer reading vlog. Don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!